Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is The Architect of the New Age by Joel Disher, F.R.C. An article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 25, Number 5, June 1947. The Architect of the New Age by Joel Disher, F.R.C. Francis Bacon began one of his essays thus: "What is truth?" said jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. Most people who inquire as to the truth about Francis Bacon are as impatient as Pilate in regard to the answer. They themselves are insufficiently interested to make the necessary search for the facts, and often exhibit a bristling attitude the moment their previous viewpoints are in danger of being corrected. The difficulty is many times multiplied when an attempt is made to write informatively and comprehensively of one whose activities have been too great to bring within a narrow focus. Alexander the Great was Francis Bacon's youthful ideal, and he early set out to imitate him, but with a very significant difference. Bacon's aim was to take the minds of men captive, and so completely and subtly did he succeed in his undertaking that hundreds of thousands made captive and owing allegiance to him have never been aware of him as their master. Early in life, he became imbued with the thought that the greatest benefactor of mankind was the one who could show man how to regain his rightful place in the realm of nature. Although he judged this to be the purpose of learning, he recognized that in his own day the deficiencies of learning far outweighed its advantages, and that men were coming more and more under the dominance of wrong masters and methods. He himself left Cambridge without his degree because of his disappointment with its educational aims. An altogether new method was necessary before learning could produce works for the benefit of man, free him from the entanglements of his own thinking, and lead him away from disputation over non-essentials. How to accomplish this was a task greater than that which confronted the mythical Hercules. In many ways, his own country was just emerging from a state of barbarism. All kinds of vicious and superstitious ideas inhabited the minds of his countrymen. Even the knowledge which the past had had lay locked away in languages which people could not read. They had no language of their own into which foreign books could be translated. While in France, as a young man, Bacon had seen how the French language had been created by a small group of men, and he conceived the idea of a similar possibility at home. With a medium of communication, a small group fired with enthusiasm for his ideal and a knowledge of fundamental laws and principles, he knew that his end could be accomplished. Fortunately, he had already contacted the ancient Rosicrucians, and from them learned those laws of life which were to be the core of his philosophic teachings. At that time as well, he received the specific commission to institute a cycle of Rosicrucian activity in England. From this time on, virtually everything he did tended to fill out some aspect of his overall plan of insinuating his new philosophy into the minds and natures of his countrymen. There were more dangers involved than we today can possibly appreciate. The 30 years from 1579 saw tremendous activity in all phases of English life, and at the close of the period an unexcelled language was the Englishman's own. Furthermore, everything to be known was accessible in that language. Such an unparalleled accomplishment is without precedent and could never have happened without design. Evidence of mastership. It is one thing to recognize that the mind of man is little disciplined. It is another to fashion a method by which it can be fed with truth so that it may learn to discipline itself. One has only to read the fable of Orpheus, as Bacon interprets it in the wisdom of the ancients, to satisfy himself that here was a man who envisaged great things. And one has but to continue such reading by a careful examination of those fruitful 30 years of history following 1579 in England to assure himself that a great dream was actually being made manifest. With Orpheus's playing, all nature became reconciled and harmonious. Then, at a blast upon a horn, Orpheus's music and the peace of nature were submerged once more in din and chaos. Men's uncontrolled appetites and passions are not stilled for long, and the would-be benefactor finds his work negatived and torn apart by the very ones he intended to be his beneficiaries. Whatever we imagine the purpose of philosophy to be, or however unrelated to day-to-day living, Bacon thought it well represented in the figure of Orpheus, insinuating into men's minds the love of virtue and peace by means of eloquence and persuasion, thus forming men into societies, bringing them under laws and regulations, and making them forget their unbridled passions and affections so long as they hearken to precepts and submit to discipline. To one acquainted only with the usual facts of Bacon's life as a lawyer and statesman as they are set forth in school texts, William Joseph Long's comparison of Bacon to one of the architects of the Middle Ages would seem not in the least to apply. Nonetheless, it is always a mistake to judge one aspect of a man's life to have been his whole concern. It would be the greatest of mistakes in the case of Bacon. In his own words, he sought to work as God works secretly for the benefit of mankind. He spoke of his intention to do this, hinting that some of his knowledge was to be imparted openly, and that some of it would be reserved, held back for those capable of receiving it. We must expect, then, many surprises from such a man whose ideas were not only original but were on a plane which is non-existent to the average man and envisaged only dimly by great minds. This is proved to be true in the L'instauratio Magna, or the Great Restoration of True Philosophy. It is not surprising that little minds have misjudged Bacon to have been attempting something here similar to what they would have attempted in the same circumstances. Actually, he sought something far different, and this fact is evident in the division of the L'instauratio into 6 parts. It is reiterated in the reference in the New Atlantis to the College of 6 days' work, and it is made altogether plain in the fact that every least thing he did was contributory to his great aim to sweep away the specious philosophy of the schoolmen and to restore to individual man a complete and workable knowledge of ontology. This suggests why scholars have never been able to fit Francis Bacon and his plan into the purview of their limited knowledge. Unable to credit anyone with a vision such as his, they have approached him from obvious and incorrect premises, and so have neglected many seemingly unrelated elements which would otherwise have given proper perspective to his work. It is some measure of the man in itself to realize that 300 years have been necessary for a competent view of him. Bacon and Rosicrucianism. In order to assess rightly the part Bacon played, not only in instituting the Elizabethan Renaissance, but also in laying the foundation for our modern world, we should be well grounded in philosophy, mysticism, cryptography, psychology, and science, and should be equipped as well with a viewpoint capable of seeing a unified connection at the center between circumstances and events which lie widely scattered on the surface. In other words, to the Rosicrucian, Francis Bacon's plan, as well as everything he wrote and did to bring it into operation, is consistently Rosicrucian. This is nowhere more evident than in 3 widely separated bits of evidence: the Rosicrucian manifestos, the New Atlantis, and the Shakespeare's play The Tempest. Although the world considered them as entirely unrelated, without any connection with each other, one can discover upon careful analysis that they are intimately connected, consistent with themselves, and proclaiming in almost every line their single source of emanation. In each case, however, scholars have mistakenly thought them to be pronouncements of something about to take place in widely unrelated fields, whereas in reality, they were statements of what already was being accomplished in several departments of one overall activity. It is impossible to take any constructive phase of the Elizabethan scene and proceed very far in its consideration without finding it subtly connected with Francis Bacon. It is perhaps true, as Charles Fort wrote, that one measures a circle beginning anywhere, yet it is much more easily accomplished by first establishing the center. If we are unprepared to do the latter, we are forced to the way of the former. And for 300 years, scholars have been going round and round the circle of the Elizabethan world, subjecting each phase of it to minute examination, coming only to half explanations and incomplete answers. Only occasionally has someone glimpsed the center and drawn the circle around it. It is at times discouraging that this is so, but the cosmic has decreed that we can never accept the larger view until we have rightly earned it. It is true that many assertions, far-fetched and incapable of proof, have been made regarding Francis Bacon's activities. This has necessarily been so because the time which will bring truth to light has not yet been fulfilled. The New Atlantis carried the motto, "With time the hidden truth will appear, tempora pate occulta veritas," as well as because many related things have not yet been recognized as belonging together. Detailed re-examination of the Fama and the Confessio, referred to as the Rosicrucian manifestos, in the past has engendered only greater confusion and bewilderment because students have been too literal and undiscerning to penetrate the intended ambiguity of these writings. A rereading of the manifestos in connection with The Tempest and the New Atlantis should be sufficient to establish the fact of there being phases of the Instauratio Magna under Bacon's direction. Furthermore, a study of Bacon's labour in England to bring an esoteric activity safely into exoteric manifestation, as well as a tracing out of his connections and activities while on the continent will, I believe, place all of these seemingly unrelated elements into acceptable juxtaposition. Prominent associates. During his stay in France as a young man, Bacon had made contacts with many who were adepts, hermeticists, and mystics. For one thing, through his foster brother Anthony, he knew either directly or indirectly Boccalini, whose 77 advertisement of Ragagli di Pamaso was incorporated in the Fama. Boccalini's work dealt with the diseases of society. In it, the god Apollo calls upon the wise men of Greece to examine into the state of society and prescribe a remedy. Their conclusion is that the age is too corrupt for cure. Curiously, the title of Boccalini's book is suggested in the Great Assizes Holden by Apollo at Parnassus, published in England by George Withers, wherein the Lord Verulam, Francis Bacon, is set down as the Chancellor of Parnassus and is made Apollo's representative to preside over the learning of his age. Another one of the men with whom Bacon was intimately associated was Henry IV of France, who came from the strongly mystic and staunchly Protestant kingdom of Navarre. The French hermeticist Barnard, in his letter De Occulta Philosophia, printed in Leiden, Holland in 1601, asked all mystical philosophers to make known their art to Henry IV. This is much more significant than it would seem, for at least one present-day traveller to the Kingdom of Navarre reports that during a brief stay there he was permitted to enter a veritable Rosicrucian lodge room wherein a well-thumbed and much annotated copy of the first folio of Shakespeare's plays lay open to view. Shakespeare's play, Love's Labour Lost, deals with a bit of contemporary French history. Its setting is the park at Navarre, and Henry, Marguerite, and other equally important personages appear thinly veiled as its characters. This play, as Alfred E. Dodd points out, conceals the genesis of the Masonic fraternity. Johann Valentin Andrea, the now famous Rosicrucian manifestos, the Fama Fraternitatis, or the proclamation of the confraternity of the very laudable order of the Rose Croix, and also the Confessio Fraternitatis, or the confession of the laudable confraternity of the very honorable Rose Cross, were printed in Germany in 1614 and 1615, although on very good authority the Fama at least was said to have been in circulation much earlier. Research regarding the anonymous author finally settled upon Johann Valentin Andrea, only to end in his vigorous denial of having had anything to do with it. To one familiar with Bacon's philosophy, as well as that of the Brotherhood described in the New Atlantis, the conception as well as the wording of the manifestos seems strangely and familiarly Baconian. Interesting in this connection is the only known portrait of Andrea. It presents an old man in skullcap, ruff and robe, flanked by Masonic symbols and encircled by cryptic shields or coats of arms. Under the portrait are these words, seen here. Two of the shields near the head of the picture carry initials, one being F, the other B. Over the head of the portrait itself are these cryptic words, Deo connexus, nunquam confusus. The word connexus prevents what would otherwise be an easy translation. It is printed as though it might be three words thus, connexus, and taken as such suggests a neat riddle. The con whispers coney, the common Elizabethan word for rabbit, and often used in emblems and headpieces to represent Bacon. And sus, the Latin for saw, a word used cryptically to signify a Freemason. If this hint is right, the phrase is to be read, to God the coney and the sow are never confusing. Applied to the matter in hand, it is a straightforward direction to the beholder. Do not be puzzled, it says, because Andrea's name is here, for this is a picture of Francis Bacon. Solomon's House. The New Atlantis, while being similar to other familiar works of utopian nature, was nevertheless designed to be of serious and practical use. Bacon's chaplain, Raleigh, indicates this in his preface addressed to the reader. This fable my lord devised to the end that he might exhibit therein a model or description of a college, instituted for the interpreting of nature and the producing of great and marvelous works for the benefit of men, under the name of Solomon's House or the College of the 6 Days Works, and even so far his lordship hath proceeded as to finish that part. Certainly the model is more vast and high than can possibly be imitated in all things, notwithstanding most things therein are within men's power to effect. That the scope of endeavor of the Brotherhood of Solomon's House embraced the universe is indicated by its being called the College of the 6 Days' Work, as well as by the words of the father of Solomon's House regarding it. The end of our foundation is the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things, and the enlarging of the bounds of human empire to the effecting of all things possible. The similarity of scope, interest, and manner of working between the Brotherhood of the New Atlantis and that of the manifestos is striking. This is further suggested in the Cave of Solomon's House and the Tomb of F.R.C. It is significantly reiterated by the fact that Paracelsus's works were said to be in F.R.C's tomb before they were written, and by the fact that some unwritten books of the New Testament were likewise said to be in possession of the Brothers of Solomon's House. The identity of the two organizations is still further emphasized by the cherub seals used by the Brotherhood of Solomon's House and the signature of the Fama, under the shadow of thy wings, Jehovah. But perhaps most pointed of all is the statement that the Brothers of Solomon's House dwelt in God's bosom, a land unknown. And the brethren of the Rosy Cross had a temple or building, although 100,000 people had very near seen and beheld the same, shall forever remain untouched, undisturbed, and hidden from the wicked world. This last suggests a deeper vein of truth running more tellingly through the affairs of men than is ordinarily suspected. As A. Waite has written, The True History of the Rosicrucians, beneath the broad tide of human history there flowed the stealthy undercurrents of the secret societies which frequently drown in the depths the changes that take place on the surface. Truth's temple. The obscurity evident in the manifestos could thus be justified, and the link between them and the new Atlantis and the Tempest could be understood as having been purposely submerged. The fact that the whole matter of the manifestos was by many believed to be a hoax is of itself evidence that what was intended by them lay too deep and too far apart from the aims of the commonalty to be in the least degree appreciated. It never seems to occur to some minds that hidden treasures, either of the heart or head, have to be delved for, and do not lie scattered where any casual passerby may pick them up. Rather, in this field, only the spiritually awakened could read rightly the intent of such matter and follow its direction. Those who thought otherwise and were disappointed consequently mistook their inability to make contact with the order as ipso facto evidence that it did not exist, and that therefore it must be a hoax. Today, in strangely similar ways, truth still has its temple, unseen and unsuspected by the hundreds of thousands who pass it hourly. Thus it is that scientific literalists and unenlightened dogmatists have missed the import of these three pieces of writing, not alone in not educing the inner truth which each individually contains, but also in failing to discover the pattern which knits these writings together and shows them forth as parts of a genuine esoteric tradition. Esoteric literature. It is to be remembered as altogether pertinent to this consideration that John Hayden issued the New Atlantis under the title A Voyage to the Land of the Rosicrucians, thus, for all time, identifying Bacon's work as truly Rosicrucian. It is equally of moment to note that the Royal Society of London, which came into existence around 1660, took its rise from the invisible Rosicrucians working at Temple House in Gorhambury, and so aptly shadowed forth in the New Atlantis. That all of this is of a piece is abundantly evident when we turn to The Tempest, which has been aptly called Shakespeare's mystery play. It has been many times remarked as significant that the last Shakespearean effort should be so like in setting and character that of Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, which came toward the close of his career. We must remember that Shakespeare's plays are not classics either because they are 300 years old or because he wrote them. They are classics for the reason that they have stood the test of time, as well as because they have something fundamental to tell. As Lena Ashwell writes of them in her book Reflections from Shakespeare, they light up the deeps of human consciousness, revealing us to ourselves, warning us against evil, helping us to live, showing us heights attainable. In The Tempest, we see dramatized a beautiful allegory in which Ferdinand, a shipwrecked prince, is prepared for marriage with Miranda, the princess, under the benevolent guidance of Prospero. All of the elements of esoteric wisdom and foreknowledge associated both with the Brethren of Solomon's House and with those of the Rosy Cross are present in this play and exhibited as existing for the benefit of man when man has prepared himself to make the proper use of them. This is immediately made plain in the play by letting Ferdinand represent the mind of man, Miranda, whose meaning is admirable or admiration, that wisdom or science which dwells in a secret unknown place. And Prospero, the higher forces which guide the mind of man to that secret wisdom. Miranda, as we first discover her, beautiful and admirable, is nevertheless incomplete. Her true qualities are still dormant and unawakened, and must remain so until the mind of man has been touched by her beauty and adds the complementary element which will manifest the perfect whole. Prospero has brought Ferdinand to this mystic isle for further test and perfection. The mind of man must be taught many lessons and be well tried before it is even ready to know what it wants or to recognize that which is most admirable. So to Ferdinand is given the heavy task of menial labor, indicating that the senses of man must be disciplined before they can be devoted to the highest ends of wisdom and science. But Prospero speeds the preparation and blesses the union of the mind of man with divine wisdom, showing all the forces of nature ready to celebrate such a marriage. It is only after the marriage has been accomplished, that is, after true learning has been restored to her rightful place in the mind of man, that Prospero breaks his staff and drowns his book. Here is a perfect example of the models which Bacon had promised to the world through his new method, models by which every man might find the way to truth, so that the mind of man should no longer be filled with superstition and disputation, but by rightly interrogating, could become wedded to true wisdom, and thus produce that which would glorify God and benefit his own estate. Again, it has been suggested that The Tempest may be read as a kind of initiation by which mortals are passed through ceremonies and experiences which will fit them to be perfect mates for divine wisdom. Thus, Prospero would stand as the initiator, Miranda would still represent divine wisdom, Caliban, man's untamed and rebellious desires, and Ariel, the master in charge. In this initiation, there are 3 planes or degrees. The first, that of temptation. Here, men are beguiled by their untamed desires, Caliban being a loose anagram for cannibal. They are led by Ariel into the mire and approach Prospero's cave to murder the divine image in man, defile wisdom, Miranda, and so rule the earth. In other words, they are bent on entering the kingdom of heaven by force. They put on hairy garments, symbolic of their descent into incarnation, and are hunted by spiritual hounds. They represent those individuals who become arrested in their spiritual development, who fail to evolve spiritually, and in successive lifetimes lapse into the mire and are said in the language of spiritual science to be doomed to the nirvana of annihilation. The second degree shows us those mortals who have come out of the mire but are still lost in a wilderness mist. They are cast onto a purgatorial isle and there undergo the ancient ritual test of famine, thirst, and loneliness. They are searching for the king's son, that is, for the lost word, or for truth. They wrestle with their accusing consciences and are at last brought out of the mist into the clear air and to the very threshold of the temple of the Holy Spirit. The third degree is the story of the king's lost son. The mind of man is symbolically represented as having worked its way out of the confusing mist of disputation and false desire, even up to the summit of the mystic isle where divine wisdom can be recognized and claimed for its own. Unified viewpoint. All of Shakespeare's plays, with their deep esoteric import, bespeak not only the unified viewpoint of Bacon and Shakespeare, but sound esoteric depths as well. They direct the thought immediately to the mystery schools of ancient times from which these fundamental teachings have been handed down. Rob them of their inner core of esoteric matter, and you take from them that which constitutes their greatness. One each bears clear-cut marks of a single design, and continuous study of them enforces the conclusion that they were part of one great purpose, which was ethical, educational, and spiritual in nature. Further, that their author sought to justify the ways of God to man, that there was a perfect order and purpose in the world, that a true brotherhood did exist in God's bosom, a land unknown, that deity was a fact and immortality no illusion. As yet, we know no more of Shakespeare than we know of Francis Bacon. Both worked as God works, and when we have rightly assessed the worth of one, we shall know the true value of the other. We shall then, in truth, be adepts of the mystic way, and we shall hold the key to the understanding of the eternal verities of life. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.